But can I do more? Can I possibly get even more cluck for the buck out of my athletic performance? And that's what I want to talk about in this lecture, is really all about the zone diet and how it affects performance. Now, I developed the zone program to treat heart disease and diabetes, but I did much of my early testing in world-class athletes, figuring if I were going to make mistakes, they could tolerate them much more effectively. So in this lecture, I'll be talking about hormones, hormonal timing, and athletic performance. But first of all, I've got to talk about something that's just as complex, even more complex, than inflammation. And this is called metabolism. Not the metabolism that Julian Michaels talks about, but basically, or Julian Michaels. What is metabolism? Metabolism is, in its simplest aspects, is how we convert dietary energy into chemical energy. Without that chemical energy, you cannot survive and you cannot move around. And all this conversion is done in the mitochondria of your cells, in every cell in your body. Without adequate levels of this chemical called ATP, life simply cannot exist. And the reason we have to do this on a continual basis, each of your cells can only store about 10 seconds worth of ATP. So think you're driving down the 405 freeway and you had to stop every 100 feet to regas. That would not be very effective. But effectively, this is what your body's doing. You have to be making this ATP on a constant basis, second by second. Otherwise, human life as we know it stops. This is why simple thinking is often wrong when it comes to nutrition and metabolism. Simple thinking, whether it be athletic performance or weight loss, calories in equals calories out. That's like saying, if no fat touches my lips, no fat reaches my hips. Sounds great, but that's not the way the world works. The right way to look at this, calories in that can be easily converted into ATP in the peripheral tissue equals the amount of ATP required to survive and move around. What this means, the calories don't count as much as their ability to make ATP. The more efficient you are in making ATP, the more of a competitive advantage you will have. So if I want to improve athletic performance, you can kind of a list of things. If I can decrease inflammation to become an athlete, and a professional athlete, inflammation is your constant companion. If I can decrease inflammation, that will improve performance. If I can reduce recovery times, that will improve performance. If I can increase muscle mass, that will improve performance. If I can improve reaction times, or increase oxygen transfer, or maintain mental focus, or decrease body fat, all of these, any one of these, if you can achieve it, will improve your athletic performance. Yet all of these are controlled by hormones. Hormones that you have control over by what you eat. Now, we talked about how inflammation is induced before, microbial invasion or macro injury, but if you're intensely exercising, you're causing micro injuries every time you exercise. And you're hoping that those innate anti-inflammatory responses in your body will repair them and cause the increase and rebuilding of new tissue. But we're confronted also by the diet. All the best athletic training in the world can be for naught if your diet is working against you. On the other hand, if you can now join a rigorous athletic training program with a fairly rigorous diet, it becomes highly synergistic. 1 and 1 now equals 5. In athletic performance, hormonal timing is everything. Well, in athletic performance, hormones are everything. Why do we have doping scandals? Because they work. The better your hormones are orchestrated, the better you perform. But everything you do, whether you're an elite athlete or a weekend warrior, it's all based on hormonal timing if you want to get the maximum performance. And there are really 4 phases of this. There's the pre-demand phase, the demand phase, the recovery phase, and the regeneration phase. So let's look at each of these individually. The pre-demand phase is just one of the few times you can foretell the future. You know exactly when you're going to start exercising. About 30 minutes before exercise, you want to basically start getting the body ready hormonally. Would you exercise without stretching? Probably not. But most of you exercise without basically getting your hormones ready for action. So you want to have a small amount. What's a small amount? Probably no more than 100 calories, but enough of a hormonal kind of touch-up of both protein and carbohydrate to get the body, to get these into the bloodstream and changing the hormonal levels before you start putting intense demands on the body. Now, when you train, there'll be hormonal changes taking place. Your pro-inflammatory eicosanoids are going to be increased. Now, if your training is simply walking around the block, you're not going to cause much inflammation. If your training is doing upside-down push-ups, as I saw on the screen there, that's going to cause a lot more inflammation. And so I take it that the CrossFit program is more dealing with kettlebells and intense training than just walking along the street. You also know that during this time period, your insulin levels will be decreased and your cortisol levels will be increased. Why? Training is a stress. Training causes inflammation, and the only way the body can handle decreasing inflammation in a very crude way is to flood it with more and more cortisol. And this is what happens oftentimes with elite athletes. They think, if I just train more, and what happens? They get into overtraining syndrome. Their performance keeps on going down, 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 because the more they're training, the more they're increasing cortisol output. And what does cortisol do? It rips out muscle mass to convert to carbohydrate. All of you know how difficult it is to build muscle mass. It can be wiped out very quickly by overtraining. And your metabolism, remember that magic word metabolism? It also changes during this demand phase. You will be depleting ATP. Otherwise, your muscles couldn't contract. You'll be degrading protein in the body. Your muscle glycogen will be depleted. You're going to increase muscle damage, and you're going to lose fluid. So these are things which are going to happen, and you basically take this into account in the pre-demand phase and also the demand phase. Now, fortunately, no one should ever exercise intensely for more than 45 minutes at a crack, because at that point, cortisol levels begin to increase. Now, this recovery phase that occurs when you put your body into an exercise format, a demand phase, this is not the real world. When you're basically recovering, you're coming back to the real world. And there's a recovery phase, maximum 2 hours, but in reality, the window closes in about 30 minutes. And in this 30-minute window, this is when you can replenish muscle glycogen and initiate the damage, the repair to the damaged tissue that you incurred during training. And it turns out, in terms of replacing muscle glycogen, the data is very clear. The data that Gatorade hates to hear, but it's very clear that protein and carbohydrate together replenish muscle glycogen to a higher degree and to a greater amount than carbohydrate alone. And also that if you basically take one of these carbohydrate mixed drinks right after exercise, what you do, you're going to raise insulin levels, and that's going to block the release of growth hormone from the pituitary. That comes out in the first 15 to 30 minutes after exercise to initiate the response to basically rebuild muscle tissue. But it can be blocked purely by taking a typical carbohydrate drink. So these are things you want to keep in mind. You're working real hard in the gym. Don't let your diet work against you. And this recovery phase, I said it's short. The window closes in about 2 hours, but it's in that first 30 minutes. And think about it. What happens after you do a hard workout? Well, in the first 30 minutes, you're usually in the locker room kibitzing with everybody. So the window's closing. And that's why when you deal with elite athletes, especially at the NFL level or college sport, they'll have basically mixed drinks of protein and carbohydrate. As soon as they come off the field, they're already drinking these things to basically recover their tissues. Because by the time you get in the shower and get in the locker room, the window has closed. And when that window closes completely at 2 hours, you are back in the real world. Your physiology is really no different than the typical couch potatoes. But for a short period of time, you're able to stress it. Now, the real thing which people have never understood about athletic performance is that now is the regeneration phase. You just don't build muscle mass in a matter of minutes. It takes time. And this regeneration phase takes place over the next 20 to 22 hours. And now what you want to do is have a small amount of protein coming in throughout the day, like an IV drip, with the right amount of insulin. You need some insulin to initiate muscle repair. And these two have to be coordinated. And you have to also control inflammation. Say, well, this is too hard. I can be thinking all the time. Well, welcome to the real world. If you want to have peak athletic performance, these are the things you have to be thinking about, because you cannot dissociate athletic training from the diet. These two are coupled. They're coupled at the genetic level, they're coupled at the molecular level. Keep them coupled, and your benefits are very powerful, synergistic. Treat them as two separate things, and you'll never get the results you think you should. All these phases, the pre-demand phase, the demand phase, the recovery phase, and the regeneration phase, requires a balance of protein and carbohydrate. And again, you see a bell-shaped curve. Not everybody will need the same balance. It's not a wide bell-shaped curve, but it's a bell-shaped curve. And you find out by listening to your body what's the right ratio of protein to carbohydrate to allow these phases to take place. And you'll see this bell-shaped curve will center around a point where you have a little more carbohydrate than protein. Not a lot more, not a lot less, but a little more.